The coffin refused to be buried, then priest opened it and shocked everyone. There are a lot of weird and bizarre stories you've heard of in the past. Well, this is one of the worst or most intriguing you'll be able to hear today and in a long time. For lack of a better word, this is a story that doesn't make a lot of sense at first, but in the end everything will. All we can add is to pay close attention to the details. The story is sad and you need to be prepared for that. It is far from something ordinary you may have heard in the past. It is so bizarre that some people still don't believe it. In order to not make this an issue with you, we'll try to explain everything. Are you prepared to be amazed? All of this begins in a small city in Arkansas. One family's been living their whole life here. The Smith family may have a daughter. There's nothing unusual on the surface. Both parents work hard and they're good people. Their daughter Mary's 16 years old and she's a good student. She studies hard and she's trying to make her life special and better than ever. Sadly, this is not going to happen. As we said, this is a sad story with a twist. In this small town, there are not a lot of accidents, problems, or similar issues. We can even say that it is a safe town to live in and enjoy life. But as everywhere else where people live, problems are possible and they may occur at any given moment. One of the worst things occurred here in this very town. One day, Mary was coming back home from a friend's house. She was driving her car and was careful. See, she's been driving very slowly and she knows how dangerous the traffic can be. All of a sudden it happened, the worst thing possible, an accident. Another driver hit her car and pushed it over the road. The area around the road was rough with a lot of massive stones and deep canals. As you can imagine, this is the worst thing that can happen in an accident. The risk is massive and usually the outcome is bad. The outcome was bad, or the worst if you prefer. Mary didn't make it. She was seriously injured and there was no way to save her. Perhaps if paramedics came sooner they could do more, but they didn't. The person who caused the accident fled the scene. He didn't stay there to call the paramedics or do anything, he just continued driving and didn't care. This is the worst thing that can happen to anyone and the worst thing a person can do to another human being on the road. As such, the police officers found out too late. They did come to the scene. They didn't see anything that could help them find the criminal. They didn't have any evidence. The next thing that happened is sad, strange, and the main part of the story. Mary's parents soon heard what happened. They were devastated. They didn't know what to do or how to react. They were heartbroken. Their whole life ended in front of their eyes and they didn't know how to survive this. Sadly, there was only one thing they could do now. They had to call the priest and arrange the funeral. The funeral would happen in 2 days, and this is where things start to unravel. No, this is not going to be usual or straightforward. You won't believe what happened. The priest, John, has been in the service in the same town for over 20 years and everyone knew him. He was a good man and he considered his job to be more than just important. He wanted to give Mary the best blessing he could to help her in the afterlife. So he started his service and soon realized something was wrong. First of all, the casket was closed and he needed it to be open. He remembered that her parents told him not to, but he still wanted to, so he did, and then he saw it. As soon as he opened the casket, he saw something weird and bizarre. He wanted to continue with the blessing, but he was unable to. He knew that something was wrong in all this, and maybe that's why the parents told him not to open it. Luckily, he didn't obey them. He apologized to the people who came here and went into the room behind. He closed the door and for a few seconds didn't know what to do. There aren't a lot of things in the world that he could do to solve this. There's only one thing he must do. Would you do the same? John was thinking of what to do to put an end to all this. There's nothing obvious or simple in this story, nothing simple he could do to put an end to this in a second, but he started dialing 911. He's been a man of faith his whole life and wouldn't break the law or God's rules, but as soon as he started calling 911, he heard loud noises. He knew that someone was coming and something was happening, but who would show up? Usually people don't come to the back unless they're invited. The parents wanted to come inside the room. They looked scared rather than sad. John knew this didn't make any sense. They should be sad. Sadder than ever before, not scared. Why would they be scared? As you can assume, this didn't make any sense. John realized that there's something seriously wrong with all this and he would need help. Anyway, the parents got inside the room and locked the door behind them. At the time, John realized that something bad was going to happen soon. You won't believe what the parents told him. As soon as they came inside, they started talking. They wanted him to continue the funeral and end it. They didn't want him to call the police. John immediately knew the parents were involved in something, but what? This is a bad case. They offered him money to not call the cops. John didn't accept the bribe. They even threatened him, but he didn't budge. It looked like they would do something bad to this priest. Sadly, then things started to feel so much worse. He wasn't in a good state. John was an older man and soon he started to feel worse and worse. He was barely able to stand on his feet. This was too much stress for him too fast and he didn't know how to react or what to do. The parents were still there and trying to get the same thing from him. John sat on the chair and was barely able to move. The parents gave him water and told him to drink all of it, but at the time he didn't know the water wasn't something he should touch. There was something in it. John was asleep. See, the parents drugged the water and he wasn't able to stay awake. It felt like he was sleeping just for a few minutes, but there was no way of knowing the definite time frame. After some time, he started to wake up. This is where things get even worse. He woke up and didn't know where he was. The room was dark and there was nothing inside it. He started to move and soon realized he was in an open casket. You can only imagine how scared he was now. He jumped out of the casket and started running. Where were the parents? He soon realized the parents were absent. They fled the scene without trace. John started looking for them in the church, but they were long gone. It didn't make any sense at all. Why would they drug him? Why would they do this? Luckily, when he got outside, he saw people he really needed. No, the parents weren't there. They fled with their car a long time ago. The people there were police officers, Andre and Don. This is where things get even more confusing. At the time John saw the two police officers, he immediately started yelling how he needed help and how he was drugged. He explained to them the whole story, and as you can assume, he didn't have a lot of time to explain it in great detail. The police officers immediately entered the church. John was with them the whole time. They had to check the scene and hopefully find the parents. Who knows what they'd have done and what mess they made. Sadly, there's something even worse inside the church. There's no casket. Mary was gone. It looked like it was stolen or disappeared. This didn't make any sense. Where is it and who stole it? The more important question is, why would someone steal a casket? They believed the parents were still inside the church and they would soon be arrested, so they spread out and started looking for them. At the same time, they were looking for the casket as well. Don called for backup and told him about the parents. A few miles away, something else was happening. As soon as the police dispatch was alerted about all this, he sent another patrol to look for the parents. They were driving the car on the road and they were looking for them. They knew which car to look for and which color. Luckily, soon they saw a car that matched the description. They pulled the car over and saw the Smith parents inside, arresting them on the spot. They were being carried to the station where they'd be detained and questioned. But the story didn't end there. As a matter of fact, it becomes even more bizarre. Meanwhile, in the church, Don and Andre were looking for the casket. They hoped to find it soon, but there was nothing. Keep in mind that the church is massive and there are a lot of rooms and hallways. They needed a lot of time to find it. At first, there was nothing there. It looked like the casket wasn't inside the church, which didn't make any sense. Soon, the two who were in radio communication started talking about leaving the scene, but then they noticed something. Don noticed there was somebody in the room. He didn't know who it was, pulling out his weapon, shouting, "Hands in the air, stay back!" But the person who was there responded, "I know you, Don. I'm a good guy." Who was it? Meanwhile, Andre did the same thing. He heard the voice from inside the room and recognized it. He knew who that man was and dropped his weapon. When they opened the door, they saw Sam inside. But who is that man? Who is Sam? Sam was actually an ex-police officer, retiring a few years back. He worked with Andre as his partner. This is how he knew both officers at the scene. When they opened the door, he showed them a private investigator badge. He was working in town and he needed help. He worked on a massive case and it was a bad one. Let's just say that Mary and her parents were all involved. He was looking for a bank robber. On the other part of town in the police station, Mary's parents didn't say a word, keeping their mouths shut and not participating. They waited for their lawyer and calmly. They weren't scared, which was weird. It's important to add that the casket of her daughter was in the room with Sam. He was looking for something and he found it inside the casket. They were still shocked with all this and they needed to see what was happening the whole time. Sam had something inside his house that he really needed. It was so important for the whole case that he wouldn't believe it. But one day Mary came to the house. She was hanging out with his daughter. The two were good friends and they spent a lot of time together. When she left, he immediately knew something was missing. This is the thing he was looking for the whole time. This is the thing the priest saw and decided to call the police for. He started looking at it for scratch. Sam got into the house of the Smith family earlier that day. He was looking for the object and couldn't find it. Then he realized this thing isn't inside the house and who knows where the Smiths hid it. But what is that thing and why would they hide it? He soon realized there was something wrong in the whole case. Then the parents got weird after John opened the casket. Sam realized something. It must be inside. Sam knew that the bank robber, who he was chasing for years, even while he was at the force, was responsible for this. He got information that the things could put an end to his life were with Mary, so he did the worst thing of all. He caused an accident and the officer killed her. This is why he didn't stop to help and why he chose that specific place that had so many dangerous curves, rocks, and so much more. But what's so important that he had to do this? What was in the casket? Sam explained to the police officers that the most important thing for putting an end to all this was tiny. It was a CD with all the evidence he collected. The CD was stolen by Mary. It was then in the hands of her parents and they tried to keep it safe and hidden as long as possible. But why would they do such a thing and why were they so evil? The answer was actually quite simple and obvious. We didn't mention that the Smiths worked at a bank their whole lives. They were rich people, but not as rich as they hoped. They wanted more money and the bank robber who was responsible for all this was the perfect addition. He approached them and gathered various information from them. He used it to steal money from the bank. He even got details about the police, security systems, and more. The Smiths were accomplices. The parents still didn't talk about anything. They kept their mouths shut. But the CD with the evidence was enough to sentence them to life in prison. The judge didn't like what they did and how bad people they were, so they weren't about to leave anytime soon. Mary had a proper funeral, nothing to do about this. Sadly, she was a victim of a bad conspiracy and bad people. But what happened to the bank robber who started all this? And who did all of this in such a small town? As you may know, and what is obvious here is the fat Smith did all that for money. As it turns out, they had cash all over the house. They were planning to steal over $50 million and they ran away to some island where they'd be safe. Obviously, Mary would go with them and they'd all live safely as much as possible. Sadly, they forgot one thing. Sam had been looking for this bank robber his whole life and even started his private investigation company to find him. The CD with all kinds of details and information was sent to the FBI. They got it within days and started tracking the man. The bank robber was arrested a few days after all this and was sentenced to life in prison. He wasn't just a bank robber, he was a criminal killer as well. During his time, he stole over $60 million from various banks. The Smiths family helped him with most of the robberies and they paid the price. John is still working in the same church and loves it. He's a good man and he's happy that the Smiths are punished and the bank robber was put to prison. He was sad for Mary. If her parents were better people, she would still be alive, but there was nothing he could do. He could only continue doing God's work and hope that people wouldn't make the same mistakes as these ones did. It is the worst mistake in life and in the town ever. It is the worst mistake of them all.